Krystal Centinello, your go-to trauma-informed boundaries and empowerment coach, helping recovering people pleasers like you step into your power and authenticity. If you've ever wondered why certain childhood dynamics shaped you into the person you are today, this podcast is for you. Today, we're talking about something that hits home for many of us. Is it normal to be a people pleaser because you grew up with an easy to anger or high-tempered parent? Spoiler alert, it may feel normal, but it's not healthy. If you spent your childhood walking on eggshells, keeping the peace, and avoiding conflict at all costs, this one is for you. We're going to unpack how living with a short-tempered parent can silence your voice and turn you into a people pleaser as an adult. We're going to dive into the Delaney family. Now, if you are a Leanne Moriarty fan, then you are very familiar with these characters from Apples Never Fall, because often fiction mirrors real life, doesn't it? And as always, I'm going to share some actionable steps to help you break free from this cycle. Before we dive in, I want to remind you about my upcoming workshop on January 25th, Trauma to Triumph, Setting Boundaries That Transform in 1 hour. It's a game changer if you've ever struggled to set boundaries without feeling like a bitch. Stay tuned for more details at the end of this episode. What does it mean to walk on eggshells? Raise your hand if you have ever walked on eggshells in your life. Now, it didn't start probably in adulthood, but it's very possible. I was recently watching the new TV show Apples Never Fall. It is based on the book by Leanne Moriarty, and it's on Peacock. I have no money making off of this. I just like to recommend a good show when I see one. I usually like to read the books first. I just didn't have the opportunity for this one. She wrote Big Little Lies, 9 Perfect Strangers, and then this one. And as I was watching the show, I was like, whoa, I need to talk about the childhood trauma that comes with a parent like this. And it needs to be on the podcast like now. So let me paint a little picture for you if you're not already thinking, oh, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to walk on eggshells. And I was that child. I grew up in that household. So imagine, just bear with me if you're not that child. You're a child. You're sitting at the dinner table and everything feels tense. You're careful about what you say because one wrong word can set off a storm. Now, does it feel familiar? For many of us, growing up with a high temper or easy to anger parent felt normal, but it's not. Dr. Nicole LaPera, who I mentioned on the previous episode, the holistic psychologist, she describes this dynamic as one where children learn to regulate a parent's emotions instead of their own. So they're feeling this tension at the dinner table, for example, and it's filling the room. And rather than processing their own emotion and releasing it, they're regulating their parent's emotion. They're trying to get their parent out of that tense state. Because by helping the parent, they in turn make themselves feel better. And again, what was adaptive then is maladaptive now. As this child, to have this parent with an unpredictable temper, kids adapt and they become hyper aware of their environment. And I want you to keep that in mind, that hyper awareness, this hyper vigilance. I'm gonna come back to it. So as this hyper aware child, they are tiptoeing around the conflict. They become peacekeepers and they prioritize everyone else's feelings over their own. Sound familiar? Is this starting to make sense now why you're still doing that as an adult? Or if you're on the road to recovery, you have been? As discussed in episode number 4, if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you give a listen. It's with Jess Frost. She's an adult child of an alcoholic. And we discuss about children of alcoholics and patterns. Now, in that episode, I mentioned I grew up around family members who were alcoholics. And even though they were fun most of the time, there was still an unpredictability to their behavior. So everything could be fun. We could be playing games. It could be a great time. And then suddenly there would be a shift and everything would become so tense. Now, you didn't know when this would happen, which added to the tension. And as soon as this would shift, I'd become a fucking superhero. Yep. I would jump into action to save the day, to avoid myself or anyone else triggering the anger. Hey, look, I got an A on my test. Or do you want to see my dance recital moves? I can show you everything. Let's put on the music. It happens to be your favorite song. It taught me keeping the peace was more important than expressing what I needed. I mean, what I needed was peace and quiet. I didn't need a blow up or a big family argument or something happening at the relative's house or wherever we were. So I instantly became the good girl. And that pattern followed me into adulthood. Dr. Susan Forward, she's the author of this book, Toxic Parents. She also talks about this. And she explains that when you grow up with a parent who has a hair-trigger temper, survival becomes your main goal. Children of angry or volatile parents internalize their shame. And then they develop this constant need for approval just to avoid conflict. This creates this lifetime of suppressing your needs to keep others happy. This is a hallmark of people pleasing. Now, in past episodes, we've also talked about attachment theory, which can be referred to as attachment styles, or as Kyra Newton, one of my past guests, has talked about attachment adaptations. Dr. John Bowlby, who developed the attachment theory, really helps us understand the why behind this behavior. He says that if a parent is unpredictable or critical, you might develop an anxious attachment style. As a child, you likely learn to monitor their mood very closely. You would adjust your behavior. You would avoid rocking the boat and making things even worse. Remember that hypervigilance I mentioned earlier? That's what that's called. And it doesn't just disappear. It follows you into adulthood, where you might still walk on eggshells in relationships, or find someone who has similar patterns where you continue to walk on eggshells because you are so good at relieving the tension in a room. And it is so familiar to you because of your childhood upbringing. And that hypervigilance is what many adult people pleasers confuse with considering themselves an empath or a highly sensitive person. And it's not that you don't have empathy or are sensitive in the positive way, but likely you're more often just regularly walking on eggshells and so hyper aware of your situation that you're ready to leap into action like a fucking superhero and save the day so that you don't feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to bring it back to where we started. What got me on this whole conversation to begin with. Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. It gives us this perfect example of how a high-tempered parent shapes their children. Without giving too much away, we're going to talk about the Delaney family. That's what the book is based around. The father, Stan, has a short fuse, and each child adapts to his temper differently. Amy, she's the eldest, becomes a perfectionist, desperate for validation. Remember, perfectionism is a manager people-pleasing trait. If you haven't checked out the types of people-pleaser episode, then go back to episode number 9 and give a listen. Logan, he's the peacekeeper type. He avoids conflict at all costs. And then there's Troy. He compensates with charm, masking his insecurities. Now, I haven't talked about this type of people pleaser yet, but Troy, he's the achiever. We kind of touched on the achiever when we talked about the hero type when it came to alcoholics. This one's a little bit different, but I'm going to call him the achiever. Stay tuned for more people-pleasing types. And then there's Brooke. Brooke is the youngest. She internalizes the chaos and she doubts herself constantly. She's the sufferer. We'll get into that into a later episode as well. But do any of these roles sound familiar to you? Which one were you and your family? Now remember, there's a lot of different types that you can relate to. But in this particular series, these roles do mirror how real-life families operate under similar dynamics. Each child learns to adapt in a way that feels normal, but is not. And that long-term impact is far from healthy. And what is that long-term impact, you ask? Walking on eggshells as an adult and people-pleasing. Now, why? Well, we talked about it. Fear of conflict. You fear being disliked, you fear being left out, and you fear conflict. When you grow up avoiding the anger, confrontation feels terrifying. You never confronted it. You'd rather say yes to something you hate than risk upsetting someone. Number 2, there is a lack of boundaries. You know that. That's what probably brought you here. Dr. LaPera explains that children of high-tempered parents often suppress their own needs. They've been putting the needs of the other person's high anger emotions first. So as adults, they struggle to set boundaries because it feels selfish or dangerous. If they express their needs, somebody might blow up at them. Watch the show or read the book. That's what totally triggered this episode for me. The child expressing the need and seeing the father's response, I recoiled and felt so uncomfortable. It explains so much. And number 3, over-awareness of others' emotions. Over-awareness? How can you be over-aware? Hypersensitive? Highly sensitive? It's called empathy. No, it's called hypervigilance. And it becomes second nature. So you don't feel like you're constantly on guard, walking on eggshells. You've grown up like this your whole life. What you're experiencing is hypervigilance. You notice every subtle mood shift. You notice every look. You notice the body movement, and you're ready to jump into action because you assume that it's your responsibility to fix it. And by the way, even as a recovering people pleaser, I still see this is in myself. and it is a constant fight. It gets easier, but the instinct is there. I also see it in my own daughter. We are fixing and healing generational trauma here, and watching her stress about pleasing others breaks me every time. I know the cycle too well. And the truth is, it's not easy, but it is possible. So every day, do something to try to help break that, and come back here, re-listen to the episodes, check out my website, join me at my workshop, and we will break this cycle together. So what can you do today? I'm sure you already have your notepad out. You know how this works. Number 1, identify the pattern. Yep. Start by recognizing, journal it, write it down, meditate on it. Go for a walk, whatever your process is. Start by recognizing how your upbringing shaped your behavior. Ask yourself, what role did I play in my family dynamic? Maybe watch or read Apples Never Fall. Was I the peacekeeper, the manager, the achiever, the sufferer? Maybe there's a new one. Number 2, reclaim your voice. You've probably at this point forgotten what your own voice has to say. You are so hypervigilant, worrying about how other people are going to react. Do you even know what you want anymore? I want you to do this. Practice expressing your needs in low stakes situations. For example, say, I'd rather have Italian tonight instead. It's easy. Instead of deferring to someone else, I don't know, what do you want? Speak up. And you can say it in a tone that isn't bitchy. Oh, I think I'd rather have Italian tonight instead. Don't reply with, is that okay with you? All right? Write it down, cross out the sentence, is that okay with you? Because I know you definitely want to say that. Or if you're really at that kind of part, if you're really that early in the process, you feel more comfortable asking if that's okay, that's fine. At least you've expressed part of your own voice. Number 3, set your boundaries with compassion. Okay? Boundaries aren't about being mean. They're not about being unkind. They're just about being clear. Say, I can't help with that right now, instead of overcommitting. Now, and think about this. If you said yes and you really couldn't do it, then you'd have to reply and be like, oh, I can't make it now. And that's a whole new layer of guilt for not being able to commit to something. So start with kind in the beginning and say, I really can't help with that right now. Then you're not letting anyone down later, because that person can go find someone else who can help and can commit. And number 4, remind yourself, confrontation isn't always negative. I know it feels like it is, but healthy relationships can totally handle disagreement. It's scary at first. Find a safe person to start with that confrontation so that you can learn it's possible. If all of this feels too overwhelming for you, my upcoming workshop on January 25th is here to help. In Trauma to Triumph, Setting Boundaries in 1 Hour, I will link it in the show notes. I'll teach you how to set those boundaries without feeling like a bitch. I have a question and answer portion. I will be able to respond in real time to the live participants. You deserve the freedom to get past these family dynamics you grew up with and start learning who you really are and how to be clear, concise, and kind. Before we wrap up, here's a sneak peek into the next episode. Is it normal to feel uncomfortable around straightforward people? If you've ever squirmed when someone has been direct with you, then this one is for you. Walking on eggshells may have felt normal growing up, but it's not. And it doesn't have to define your adult relationships. By recognizing these patterns, reclaiming your voice, and setting compassionate boundaries, you can break free from the cycle of people-pleasing. Don't forget to visit my website. Specifically, what type of people-pleaser are you? Maybe you're a Troy, maybe you're an Amy, or a Logan, or a Brooke. Now, they're not called that on the quiz, but go check it out. krystalcentinello.com/type. It is linked in the show notes. And put in your name and email address so that you can be connected to some free resources, details about upcoming webinars, and some other bonuses. Additionally, connect with me on Instagram at Complete Coaching with Krystal. Send me a message, share anything you like. I look forward to connecting with you there. Thanks for tuning in to Normal But Not. I'll see you next week. And remember, you don't have to walk on eggshells anymore.